Welcome to American Issues Take One on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about Hawaii. Hawaii is not exempt from the damage Trump is doing. In fact, we may be especially vulnerable to it. Our guest for the show is DeSoto Brown, historian and archivist at the Bishop Museum. Welcome to the show, DeSoto.
Thank you for having me, Jay. We have a lot to talk about, as you and I always do. And unfortunately, it's not fun and interesting stuff. It's scary stuff.
Well, Hawaii is not exempt. I think that's clear. We can establish that from the get-go, from the damage the Trump administration is doing to the country. And we can assume that that damage is huge and getting bigger. We need to be prepared for and deal with that damage as it affects Hawaii. And we must also examine what we can do to resist and recover from it in Hawaii. So I guess the question I would ask you at first is why? Why should we be concerned? We're 2,600 miles away from California. We're a different history, a different culture, a different society, and we are a blue state. We have a long history of the Democratic Party here in the state. Daniel K. Inouye, for example, and many others have reflected the fact that this is a blue state. Why should we be worried?
We should be worried like everybody else in the United States and a lot of people in other countries as well. And there are a number of reasons why. First of all, and I'm speaking in this particular situation as someone who works for a nonprofit, Bishop Museum. Nonprofits all over the United States depend upon federal grants to keep going, and Bishop Museum is no exception. So the place that I work is going to be affected, is being affected in ways that I personally do not know about yet because they haven't been shared with the rest of the staff that I'm a member of. And that means that all kinds of places are going to suddenly have huge budget cuts. And we see this at the University of Hawaii as well. And we know that that is happening. And that's going to affect not only the people whose jobs may perhaps be lost, it's going to affect everybody who is a participant in whatever that organization does. It's going to affect all the people who, for example, attend the University of Hawaii. But second, and probably even more significant in the long run, is because it's going to affect the larger part of the community. The foundation of our economy locally is tourism. And tourism, one, is always something that is extraneous in most people's budgets. So if the economy goes bad, you stop doing things like going on trips, because going on trips, particularly for us, because we have to use airplanes, we've got to travel by air. That's very expensive. We are going to cut those things out of our budgets because the economy is going to get bad because of what Donald Trump is doing. But furthermore, it also means that all those people who come here are going to be coming here less because the economy is going to go south. And also, Donald Trump goes out of his way to insult other countries. Donald Trump goes out of his way to belittle, to demean, to just, as I said, insult and bully other countries, which means that the citizens of those countries then say, well, I'm not going to go to the United States for my vacation. And surprisingly, I mean, for example, Canada, we've really lost, and we know that we've lost a lot of Canadian tourists who are major part of the tourism in certain parts of the United States. And they don't just come as tourists, but they come cross over the border as customers to buy things. They're not doing that anymore. They've cut way back on that. European Union, people from Britain, and then people from the European Union and continental Europe. A great number of them, millions of them, now reject Donald Trump and will have nothing to do with the United States. That means that those people are not going to come as tourists. Now, we don't depend on a lot of European tourists to come this long distance to get to us. So that's not as much of a deal. When and if Donald Trump does something insulting to Japan, and that's really just a matter of time because that's his MO, is to insult people and be mean and stupid. Then if there is a groundswell of opinion in Japan by potential tourists to not want to come to the United States at all, including us, that's really going to have a major effect on our economy. And again, we are very dependent upon tourism. During COVID, for example, when there was no tourism, obviously everything shut down. It's catastrophic for big businesses, small businesses, for transportation, for hotels, for car rental companies. I don't know if you remember, but during COVID, thousands of rental cars had to be parked in places like Ala Moana Center and in Pearl Ridge Center because nobody was driving them, nobody was renting them. Every one of those cars that wasn't rented meant somebody wasn't getting paid, something wasn't being supported. And again, every time somebody loses their job or isn't being paid as much or has to pay more out, it affects everything else that they economically interact with. They don't buy as much food. They don't go to the movies. They don't buy clothes. They don't buy as much gasoline. All the businesses that they patronize are touched as well. We haven't seen that major effect hit us. And the other thing that I want to mention too is the lack of shipping. We are incredibly dependent upon shipping things in from the outside world to live the lives that we expect to live. And if all of a sudden a lot of that stuff isn't coming here because China has cut back on its exports because the people who are getting this stuff here can't pay these preposterously shifting number tariffs that Trump just arbitrarily pops up with and then changes 10 minutes later. That hasn't really hit us yet. But we know from what we have heard and what we've read and what we've seen in news reports that that stuff isn't coming here. And when we start going to stores and are not able to find things that all of this stuff that gets imported from China, I mean, I was thinking the other day, I've got to buy a sink stopper. Well, I don't know if sink stoppers are made in China. And if they are made in China, am I going to be able to find one? I mean, something as stupid as that. But again, it's going to, all of these things are going to be happening to us, and they haven't really hit us with full force yet. So we're not comprehending them. We're not anticipating them as much as we should be. And it's still somewhat distant. It's still somewhat way over there, like you said at the very beginning. California is a long way. Washington, D.C. is a long way. It's kind of just out there, not really real yet.
When is this going to happen to us? And we can make an educated guess about that because we know that tariffs are in place against, for example, Asia. We know that that there will be a price to pay for all his machinations, and a lot of companies on the mainland are shutting down on a preemptive basis, so that people are out of work. People are out of work in Japan and China in anticipation. The whole global economy is being affected. This has got to be right there, as you said, right there on the horizon. So it's not only the prices and the availability of product on our shelves, it's the availability of tourists and visitors. And let me say one other thing that comes to mind from your discussion, and that is Hawaii is connected right now. It has been increasingly connected, not only by telecommunications, but by travel and by airplane routes and shipping routes and even cruise ships. It's connected. And if you start removing those things, if you start separating us and separating them, that is, people on the mainland and in Asia from us, what you get is a different Hawaii. We become ourselves isolated. And so I would ask you, A, when is this going to all happen? And B, how does Hawaii change as an isolationist state of islands?
When it's going to happen is going to vary on what it is that's being affected. And again, part of the thing that's so crazy now is the incredible lack of consistency. Again, Trump arbitrarily, willy-nilly just pops up in his brain with the idea of, all right, I'm going to put a tariff of this much percentage on this country. And then literally minutes later, he might say, no, I'm going to cut it down to 10%. And 2 days later, it may be 150%. Okay, because all of that is so unsettled, because there's no stability, part of the reason it's impossible to really be sure when things are going to start to really slap us in the face and become reality is because Washington, D.C., and Trump in particular is so unstable. We get statements from him totally out of his brain, out of his arbitrary decisions that now I'm going to put 150% tariff on products from this country. And 10 minutes later, no, I'm going to cut it down to 10%. And 2 days later, it's no, it's back now to 75%. All of this is so unsettled because this one maniac is out of control and just, again, arbitrarily coming up with everything, anything that comes into his brain, is that we cannot anticipate what's going to happen. We can't be, nobody can plan anything. And for businesses, this is catastrophic. And one of the things that we've talked about before is businesses have to order merchandise way in advance. So businesses have to order back to school merchandise and particularly Christmas stuff. I mean, it's already too late for some of that stuff to be ordered, even now in May of this year, which is when we're recording this. So all of this, again, chaos makes it very difficult to know when certain things are going to start to hit us personally. But again, we know that the ships have stopped coming. So we know that within a certain amount of time, we're going to start running out of certain things that we import from China. That's just a reality. It's not coming anymore. We know that from the fact that the numbers of ships have dropped so specifically, so tremendously. But again, it's going to be here and there. You're going to go to the store and something isn't going to be in stock anymore. There'll be other things, but they won't be the thing that you need. And then you're going to start to see it. Now, what can we do about this? This has always been our problem here. We live an American lifestyle. That means we have all of the things that we want at our fingertips, and we expect that and we demand that. We pretty much demand that when we can go to any one of innumerable supermarkets and find all this stuff from all over the world right there in front of us, and we don't even think about or understand where it comes from. And as an example, a few months ago, when all of the tariff nuttiness began, I looked at the fruits and vegetables at Safeway to determine what might be affected. One of the things that nobody thinks about is if you want to have apples for sale all year round, if you want to have grapes for sale all year round, they have to come from totally diverging parts of the world because apple trees only have apples once a year. And if you're going to get them during the time that the apple trees in North America are not bearing apples, then they have to come from the southern hemisphere where the seasons are reversed. And it's the same for grapes. There's only a grape crop once a year. If there aren't grapes coming from California and North America, then they have to be coming from South America and Central America. All of these little things that you never think about are right there. Well, what's the solution for this? There isn't any short-term solution for this unless it's that we get accustomed to the idea of not having everything we want exactly when we want it. And we're not going to be happy with that. And it also means that things are going to cost a lot more. Nobody wants to pay more money. Everybody will say, oh, but we don't have enough money as it is already. Well, thank Donald Trump for suddenly prices going up because the tariffs are going to do that. How can we cut back? Well, we're not going to voluntarily cut back. We're only going to cut back because we can't get the stuff. And there's going to be a lot of people gritting their teeth and getting angry or feeling scared that when they go into a store and don't find things, it's going to become real to them. And it's not quite there yet because there's always a delay between what has been shipped in, what's in a warehouse, and then what gets to a store. But in the coming months, shortages and disappearances of certain products are going to become right in our face. And the products that are there are going to cost a lot more. But again, it's so piecemeal and it's so scattered that it's not really in our face yet. It's not like, for example, a dock strike, which we used to go through regularly, where suddenly everything all of a sudden isn't there anymore because it isn't being shipped in. This is going to be more sort of a soft landing initially than a hard one versus other catastrophes that we've already dealt with.
Well, yeah, but you describe a situation where tourists aren't coming, and tourism hospitality is the engine of our economy. Think about whether Hawaii exports anything. Hawaii doesn't export anything. The only way to get cash coming in here is with tourism. That's the way it works. And if tourism slows down, it affects everybody because there's no cash trickling through the system, the economy of Hawaii. Everybody will feel it because everybody is dependent on it. That's one thing. The second thing, of course, is the prices will go up. There will be an inflation for sure and unavailability. But there's more. There's more. I want to mention there's more. There won't be money for social programs. You know, we see a tax on Medicaid, Medicare, and soon enough, Social Security. A lot of people depend on that for their livelihood. The social safety net in general. Think of all the, all the elements of the social safety net from the federal government, school lunches and SNAP program, and you name it. I mean, it's money coming in so many ways to help us live in these islands. Yes, we pay our federal taxes, and yes, we get something quid pro quo. But at the end of the day, under Trump, we're going to pay our federal taxes, but no benefits are going to come in. And we're not going to have that cash either. So that's a double whammy. And of course, we'll be separated. And as you mentioned, we won't know what the federal government is doing. We won't really know. They won't tell us. They won't tell us about the unavailability. And so you have, communications gaps with the defunding of PBS and NPR. CBS is under attack. MSNBC is under attack. Where I get my news that I consume from those. I worry about the newspaper, the one newspaper we have. And so I feel that there's a fair chance we're going to be disconnected. So disconnected, no money, no goods, no tourism, real quiet. And my question to you, people, you said, and I want to explore this, that people would become unhappy, and soon, or relatively soon. What happens when people in Hawaii become unhappy? I know it's the aloha state. Everybody's supposed to be aloha, but query, what happens when 1.3 million people become unhappy?
This is something that we do not know yet. And again, it's impossible to say how any individual person is going to come to the moment where the light bulb goes on and they say, wait, this is really bad. And that one guy in Washington, D.C. is the cause of all this. And again, first of all, there are still Trump followers, and there aren't as many here as there are in other parts of the United States, fortunately, but they're here. Everything he does, they will excuse, they will defend, they will alibi, they will justify, they will downplay, and they will focus all their anger on those who oppose Trump because those are the bad people. And they're just following the playbook that they've been indoctrinated to follow. The rest of the population, a good chunk of people already don't like Trump, are already aware of the dangers, but it hasn't really come to fully in our faces yet. But again, it's like what has to happen. There has to be the people, the chunk of the population that's still blasé about it or doesn't really think about it or hasn't been affected, for them to say, this is not going to work. This is not working. Something has to change. And how that change is going to happen, how we're going to get beyond this particular time period in our history, which is increasingly dark and foreboding. Nobody knows this. Is it going to be that we're going to hang on until we vote him out? Is it going to be because someone is finally going to stand up and say, no, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. We are not going to live this way anymore. We are going to stop this somehow. And when I say somehow, does that mean that there is actually some kind of rebellion? Is there actually some kind of revolt? Is there somebody in the military that says, we won't do this? Is there somebody in the government that steps up and literally, does it come to violence? We don't know. And this is all of the stuff that, again, we're going to just be watching this in our immediate future. You mentioned the losses of, for example, the funding for school lunches and for Medicaid and things like that. Let me also say too that there are things that affect us, like the increasing defunding of the air traffic controllers. We totally depend upon air traffic here. If we're cutting back on those people and planes are not able to land as often as they want to, that's a catastrophe for us. And we've already seen that happening at the Newark airport in New Jersey, which is a very busy airport because it's right near New York City. So there's a lot of air traffic there. We are going to see the effects on the National Weather Service. And that's important for us because we're going into hurricane season. All of the weather reporting that we depend upon originates with what's funded by the US federal government. There are independent people online who do their own weather forecasts. That's fine. But where do they get their raw data? They get it from the federal government. They get it from the satellites that are paid for and run by the federal government. They get it from all of the National Weather Service reporting that happens every day. That's being cut. And if we do have the misfortune of undergoing a hurricane or any other natural disaster, which of course could be a tsunami too, all of a sudden, the federal funding that helps people recover through FEMA, that could suddenly be brought to an end, again, arbitrarily by Donald Trump. All of any of those potential catastrophes or potential problems, again, if they happen that way, are going to open the eyes of a bunch of people who are going to say, something's got to be done. And a lot of us are sort of saying that into the air, something has to be done, but it isn't being done. And the situation is potential to become so dire that I think there is the potential for something really major and some kind of upheaval, some kind of rebellion, some kind of seizing of power. That's not impossible. It seems unlikely, but it's not impossible.
You're talking about a national event
Yeah.
or a series of national events, but locally, I think the one thing to consider is the possibility that people will say, "I can't live here anymore,"
Oh, yeah.
particularly after a big storm. A big storm. Let me give you the scenario: a big storm, and FEMA doesn't help, and the state doesn't have reserves. Remember, the state gave us a huge tax reduction last legislature last year. That's going to cost $1 trillion over the next decade. And we don't have that money in the state coffers. So we don't have a reserve that's meaningful, in my opinion. And then if we need to replace FEMA, which we would have to do, that's the notion in Washington, we won't have any money to do it. And what do you do then? And people will lose their homes, just like in Maui. The people in Maui still can't rebuild for many, many reasons. That's another show. But that could happen statewide. It could happen in Oahu. It would be very, very serious. And without FEMA to help us, without federal funding to help us, we're going to be in trouble. Everybody will be in trouble. And finally, you might say, well, the military will help us. Well, remember what Trump said just earlier this week in the Memorial Day speech he gave at West Point. He runs the military. He expects total loyalty from all of them. And he has replaced the senior brass to his own loyalists. And if he says you go out and help, they would go out and help. If he says you don't go out and help because Hawaii is a blue state, I have no particular affinity for Hawaii, don't help. It's all him. Recently I saw that in the case of FEMA, FEMA wasn't giving any money to Arkansas as a result of some disaster they had. And they had to approach Trump to see if he would change that. And he changed it personally because they appealed to him on a political basis. Say to myself, this guy is controlling where FEMA spends its resources, where it goes, what it does. Just him. FEMA is a shadow of its former self. And the military, you cannot assume the military would help us out in a time of crisis.
No.
But I want to talk about one other thing, and that's public health. It's all the news that Trump is making vaccines less available, and Kennedy, his health director, is not providing measles vaccines, and so the result is 1,000 people have measles in this country right now, and the result is some of them will really be sick or die. Some of them already have died, and that will affect Hawaii. We should be very careful about public health. But that's a fight uphill, because it's not so much that the federal government will not provide the funding for public health, which is true, but they will withdraw the vaccines. And we could have an epidemic here, a statewide epidemic, in no time. Your thoughts?
You are absolutely correct. And this is one of the things that's just so bizarre to even have to think about, as to consider how could this possibly be happening? Vaccines were invented in the 1700s, for crying out loud. The smallpox vaccine was understood hundreds of years ago. It's not like somebody just came up with this evil idea that we're going to stick things in you. We know they work. And yet, totally against science, totally against logic, what you just said is exactly the case. We are always right on the verge of something happening that we don't know is going to happen, like COVID. When COVID popped up, suddenly it was a real slap in the face for everybody all over the world. And it had always been discussed in the abstract, there is going to be another pandemic all over the world. But yeah, well, so what? And then it happened. And then fortunately, a vaccine was developed, which turned the tide on a lot of it. And anybody with a brain in their head got vaccinated because they didn't want to get super sick or die. However, you're absolutely right. Every time these things get cut, it is always, we're making ourselves more vulnerable and more endangered. And again, we don't think about it or don't really know it because it hasn't happened. And when it suddenly does happen and suddenly something pops up and there's no vaccination material for us, yeah, people are going to start to get sick. And yes, people used to die in huge quantities or get sick in huge quantities from diseases that we don't even think about today. Rabies, okay? Rabies was never a major thing that killed millions of people, but rabies is impossible to cure. If you get exposed to it, you can get a series of shots that will keep you from getting sick. But once the symptoms have developed, you are going to die. And that's it. Well, if there isn't any rabies, there isn't any rabies medicine for you, that's going to be a catastrophe. We don't have rabies here because we vaccinate animals for it. And we used to have a very lengthy animal quarantine that every pet that got brought in had to sit in a cage for 6 months before they could be let loose because we didn't want rabies. All of those things that, on a larger scale, all of the stuff that we take for granted, that yes, it's there and it will protect us, it isn't going to be there anymore because it's intentionally being cut back. And again, we don't think about it until it's right in our face and it's happening. And then we're suddenly going to say, what? We can't be protected against this? What? We have the possibility of getting really sick or dying? We don't think about it. You and I are old enough to make sure that we will continue to we'll be able to get COVID vaccinations. But COVID vaccinations have been cut for everybody under 65. And I think you can probably go get one if you want it because you have a health condition, but it isn't going to be available across the board. What does that mean? Does that mean COVID will suddenly come back? We don't know. But when it does, we're going to have to deal with it.
Medicines in general are being imported from China. They're being manufactured in China and being imported. And it doesn't pay to have an argument with China, which is what we're having. We're having an increasingly, nasty argument with China. We're having the trade wars, tariff wars, and the war in general. Trump is having a war in general with China. So China's not buying American treasury paper anymore. They don't go to the auctions. They don't buy. We're losing funds on that side. But by the way, the problem is that we don't find out about this stuff because the Trump administration doesn't want us to know about this stuff. And that is viral in its own way. The media is not telling us because it doesn't know either. It doesn't have access to information which could be life-saving. So, for example, if you went to Long's drugstore and you looked for a medicine that was very important, they might not have it because the whole supply line has been damaged in some way. This is very troublesome, and people will die. And you won't even know what's happening. You'll find out at the counter with the pharmacist. That's where you'll find out. You won't know in advance. So but wait a minute. We got a doctor who is the governor. A doctor who went and testified a number of times in Washington against Kennedy's confirmation. So query, what can he do? And while I'm asking, what can the legislature do about all these things we've been covering? What can government do in Hawaii to protect us? Or better yet, what is government doing right now?
This is a tremendously important question, and I don't have the answer for that. And here's the thing. If, for example, this is just crazy speculation, but if, for example, the United States actually broke up because of Trump and certain states seceded and certain states then affiliated themselves with other places like Canada, our problem in that scenario, and our problem, which is exactly the basis of what you're talking about right now, is there are only 1 million and some of us. We're small, we're tiny. Within the world, that's nothing. That means that 1 million people together, way out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, have very little power on their own. So what can the legislature do? What can the governor do? Not very much. If we were a separate country that was able to negotiate on our own with other countries, we would be the masters of our own fate far more than we are now. But I don't want to be a citizen of a country that is that small, because then you are stomped on, then you are taken over, then you are pushed around. You have no financial or economic power to be able to say, no, we won't pay that much from you, China. We'll pay you this much. Forget it. If that was the case, they would dictate to us what the price would be, and there aren't enough of us to have any clout to change that. So we're still in that situation, whether we are part of the United States and are being pushed aside and intentionally deprived because the president doesn't like us because of our politics, or whether we're a separate country, we're still in the same boat of we don't have any power. We don't have the power to really do any of this stuff, to threaten anybody, to talk to anybody. We have no negotiating power. So that is a problem.
We're not going to be able to secede from the union. We have hundreds, maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands of troops here.
Oh yeah,
and they work for Donald.
Yeah.
And you want to go up to the gate at Pearl Harbor or Hickam and say, "Excuse me, we'd like to secede." You're not going to be able to do that. The American military will stop you. It'll be a civil war that lasts for 10 minutes, maybe 5. So we have to stay here. That leaves us with, just a few options. One is, I guess, we could join the movement against Trump on the mainland. And Ann Lopez, the Attorney General, has brought the state into, along with 20 or 21 or 2 other states, other attorneys general, into lawsuits against Trump. Don't know the status of it. I'm not sure that I have all that much confidence that all those states will be able to stop Trump in all these lawsuits, but we can do that. The legislature, I'm afraid I don't have a whole lot of confidence in them. And as you mentioned, there are some Republicans, not only in the legislature, but who respond to Republicans in the community. And arguably, 1/3 of Hawaii are Republican, MAGA Republican. And it's very hard to wrap your mind around that, but they're not going to help. And finally, I mean, our delegation can't do a whole lot. They could do stuff if they were in the majority, but they're not in the majority. And I'm not all that optimistic about what's going to happen on the midterms. But right now, all they can do is talk. and it isn't really helpful. So we really don't have a lot of options here. We are, as you said, we're vulnerable in so many ways, on so many levels of our quality of life in our society. So that leaves an individual choice. It leaves the choice of what to do, what to do. And I see a number of options. I would like your thoughts about these options and any other options. Number one is we can leave, and we can leave and go to the mainland, to a place on the mainland we feel is safer, better, more moral, more out of harm's way with Trump's madness. That's one departure. There may be places on the mainland. Two is we could go to a place outside the United States. We could go to Canada. We could go to New Zealand. A friend of mine is actually going to New Zealand, I'm telling you. And Australia. Commonwealth countries are good. Commonwealth countries may be better than the UK, as a matter of fact, these days. But some of the places, including Asia, there's a lot of places in Asia that are much more appealing and that are actually quite democratic, as they are. That's another option. Another option is to hunker down, as you mentioned early in this discussion, and just take it. Try to live through it. Not have the things we want, not have the social engagement we used to have, not have the health we want. Just live through it and try to get out the other side. Look for the light at the end of the tunnel. That may be a long tunnel. And finally, there's this thing, and I wanted to ask you about this: the breakdown of aloha, the breakdown of civil society, where people, on one side of the aisle, so to speak, they take Trump's message and they take Trump's dog whistle thing and assume that it gives them license for violence. Okay, and if they want something, they go and take it. And in an island community, it's not hard to do that. And then, of course, that suggests that maybe other people will respond to those who would take, and then you have systemic violence in the state. It's a long shot from where we are, but then a lot of things we've been talking about, DeSoto, are long shots from where we are. But I'd be interested in your thoughts about what the individual does when this day of reckoning comes.
Well, the idea of moving away is a huge one that a lot of people simply aren't able to do. They aren't able to do it because of their health. They aren't able to do it because of their job. They aren't able to do it because they don't have the money. They aren't able to do it because they just don't want to leave. But we know, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people have left and continue to leave for economic reasons. And there's the joke of Las Vegas being the ninth island because so many local people have moved there. And that's because it's affordable in a number of ways and there are more jobs and blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, there is that, but that's such a major thing for people to do that a lot of people cannot or will not do that. If you're too old, if you have lots of kids, etc. So that's not on the page for a lot of people. Moving to another country is even more of a thing like that. I mean, and you can't just go to another country and expect to move in either, because of course there are lots of hoops to jump through, and so maybe, but maybe not. And yes, I agree. It again, it's such a huge deal to immigrate like that a lot of people will not even try to do it, although they may think about it. But yes, I've known people in the past who seriously planned to move to New Zealand way back in the second President Bush administration. And I think actually I knew some people who bought property in New Zealand for that reason. But in any case, so what else do you do? Well, one of the things in all of this is you have to make yourself feel better. If you really think about it too much, it's so frustrating and it's so depressing that you have to have something to keep you going, like you said, to hang on, looking for the light at the end of the tunnel. And for me, being able to go on this program makes me feel a lot better. So this is my way of coping with this because I can vent about it and you and I can talk about it and it's mentally healthy for me. But everybody's going to have to come up with his or her own decision as to how they're going to cope with this. And for a lot of people, it's easier to just put it aside and not think about it and think, well, today I've got to go to buy this and I have to make sure I pay this bill, et cetera. And you can just occupy yourself with the small things of life that are right in your face and think, I'll go read this, I'll go watch TV, I'll go to a movie, or I'll do something to distract myself. And you don't deal with it because it's so huge and it's so overwhelming and it can be so depressing that your natural reaction is to say, I won't think about it, I'll do this, and I don't hear it and it isn't happening. So I don't have an easy answer for what you just said. I mean, everybody's going to have to make his or her own decision on this. Personally, I don't plan to move anywhere or try to go anyplace. I'm going to just try to hang on, but I'm also going to raise my voice in the way that I'm doing now to make it clear that no, I don't agree with this and no, this is wrong. And we're shooting ourselves in the foot and we're standing back and watching ourselves bleed and not doing anything about it. But again, as a human being, just one out of billions, there's only a limited amount I can do. If there is, I mean, if there come to be much more vociferous political movements in the United States, which then spread to us here, that is something that potentially we'll feel better about being a part of. But there's only so much we can do. It is possible for demonstrations to become so massive that the government has to respond. And you will remember during the Vietnam War how there were some immense demonstrations in places like Washington, D.C., where even Richard Nixon finally had to acknowledge and do something about. And there was violence too. Kent State, four students were killed at Kent State University in Ohio from one of those demonstrations. And when all that happened, 1968, 69, 70, 71, the government actually had to respond. And we see this in other countries too, where the demonstrations are so massive that finally the government has to say, okay, we give up. We're going to do something about what you people are agitating for. Are we going to get there? I hope so.
I do too, but I don't think we live in the same time as Kent State, where the government responded, and I don't think that Trump would respond in any favorable way. He would bring in the military, and if you opposed him in a protest that he felt was threatening, even if it wasn't, a lot of people would die. This is a problem. But one thing from what you were saying, and it's worthy to discuss it here at the end of our conversation, is that you can't put your head in the sand, because then you're surprised by everything. Then you haven't done your job for yourself and your family and your friends. You have to remain aware. Now, whether you choose to speak about it or protest about it is another question. But at least, at the very least, you have to do everything you can to be aware of the dynamics, of the trend lines of what is happening to our society, and make intelligent choices based on the data that you can accumulate that way. One last point I make is this: to protest in these days and these times increasingly is a matter of courage. Whether you protest with a letter to the editor, whether you protest on the college campus, whether you protest in the streets on a given Saturday, it takes courage. Because as we go down the path, just as when people went down the path in Germany in the 30s, increasingly it takes courage, because there is risk attached to raising your voice. And risk means you could be hurt, you could be killed, you could lose your property, you could lose your freedom. And that's what happened then. And that could happen under Trump. That could happen now. It is happening for some people, including citizens. You could lose your freedom. And so you have to gird your loins, and you have to determine whether you will be courageous to deal with the risk or not. Your thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely right on that. And that is, again, a personal decision everybody has to cope with. Everybody has to come to some kind of conclusion as to whether they're going to do that or not. And you can't dictate to someone. You can't force somebody at the point of a gun to go out and do it. They're going to only do it if they really feel like it can make a difference. And for example, just recently, well, last year or the year before, Cuba is an incredibly repressed society. Cuba is going through the privations and the deprivations that we're talking about as potentially happening to us all the time. They have no electricity, they have no water, they have no food, they have nothing. And they're living in houses that are literally falling apart and killing them sometimes because they collapse. They they actually went out and demonstrated to a limited degree. And of course, they were all immediately stopped. They were forced into, I mean, literally you get picked up and put in a prison. So they took that risk in a way that, at the moment, even for us, we can't comprehend. So if it gets to the point, everybody's got a breaking point. Everybody has a personal breaking point, at which point they're going to say, I can't stand this anymore. I've got to do something. And what I'm going to do is this. That is going to happen for some percentage of the population as this continues, because it's going to just break people individually to where they go in and take that stand because they simply can't stand it anymore. And there will be a lot of people who never get there. There'll be a lot of people who are scared of it, who put it off, who deny it, who pretend it isn't happening, who don't want to think about it. And they won't, but some people will. And when that happens, we hope that enough others will jump on board to where some kind of change is forced, even if there's resistance, even if there is repression, further clampdowns, which is very plausible. They're already happening and they're just going to continue. But it's up to each one of us to decide what we're going to do. And that's when it's going to happen.
One thing is clear from this discussion, and that is that our society is changing, maybe slowly at first, but then it will change much, much more dramatically soon enough. And that's a good prediction. And the second thing is, we have to learn to recognize, stay aware, and deal with it. And that means we have to come back and discuss it again, DeSoto. We have to keep watching this. We have to keep a beat on what's happening around us. Hawaii is vulnerable. Hawaii is really unprepared.
Yes.
And Hawaii has to, at the very least, deal with the risks and the possibilities going forward. Thank you very much for this discussion. You want to make some final word of advice to anybody?
Don't pretend it's not happening. It is happening. Don't avoid learning about it because it's scary and you don't want to think about it. Don't turn away from it and pretend it'll go away if you put your fingers in your ears. It isn't going to. You have to think about it. You have to think about it for yourself. You have to think about it for everybody else around you. And you have to be aware of, when the time comes, how you can take action to keep yourself going. And we don't know yet when or how that's going to happen, but be aware that it is very likely to happen, and you are going to have to participate somehow.
We face great challenges, and we are not exempt. We are not exempt from what is going on. Thank you so much, DeSoto Brown, historian and curator of the Bishop Museum, for this very important discussion, and I hope we can continue it.
We will continue this.
I'm Jay Fidell, host of American Issues Take One, and we've been discussing Hawaii. Hawaii is not exempt from the damage Trump is doing. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha. Aloha, DeSoto.
Aloha, Jay. Aloha, everybody else.